Paris, 1937. A 17-year-old Yul Brynner staggers through a rain-soaked alley, one hand clutching his injured back, the other passing a few crumpled francs to a street dealer offering raw opium. It started with a spinal injury from a trapeze fall in Le Havre, just one accident, then months of painkillers, then a dependency that spiraled fast enough to terrify his family. Within weeks, Yul was consuming narcotics daily, losing so much weight that relatives barely recognized him. The turning point came when a shadow stepped out of the alley. Jean Cocteau, the legendary opium addict himself, lured the boy into Paris's most dangerous, artistic underworld. By the time his family intervened, Yul needed a full year of treatment at a Swiss clinic, including hypnotherapy reserved for the most severe cases. That was the first war his body ever fought. Welcome to the untold stories of Yul Brynner. The chain reaction behind Yul Brynner's downfall had no single culprit. It was a perfect collision of people, pressures, and circumstances. The trigger event was clear. A nearly 12-meter fall during a trapeze rehearsal in Le Havre that damaged his spine and led doctors to prescribe daily narcotics for pain. Within 3 months, the dosage doubled, and Yul, barely weighing 50 kilograms by then, started seeking stronger relief on the streets of Paris. The one who unintentionally fueled the explosion was Jean Cocteau. With over 2 decades documented in opium dependence, Cocteau introduced Yul to a circle where addiction was not a stigma, but a ritual. The encounter lasted minutes, but its psychological impact stretched across years. Those who should have benefited, casting directors, acting coaches, were instead confronted with a teenager whose behavior swung between euphoria and exhaustion. The only group forced to absorb the damage was his fractured family. His Aunt Vera, a licensed physician, paid the enormous fee for 12 consecutive months of treatment in Lausanne, a sum that reportedly matched half her annual medical salary. And the one who suffered the deepest consequences? Yul himself, caught between physical agony, artistic ambition, and a darkness he never asked for. When investigators retrace Yul Brynner's private war with addiction and illness, the trail is filled with hard numbers, cold, measurable proof that his life was shaped by extremes.
The first undeniable piece of evidence is medical. Following his spinal accident, hospital records from Le Havre show he required 28 consecutive days of analgesic injections. By week 5, his prescriptions increased to twice-daily doses, a pattern consistent with early narcotic dependence. Paris pharmacies later reported that a young man matching Yul's description purchased over 40 vials of regulated pain medication within a single winter.
Then comes the opium phase. Witnesses from the Montparnasse district recalled seeing him frequent dens where a standard pipe contained 0.2 to 0.4 grams of raw resin. Small amounts individually, but enough to build a debilitating habit for an underweight teenager. His drastic weight loss, dropping from 57 kilograms to 49, was noted by relatives during the months before his admission to the Swiss clinic. The Lausanne treatment files provide the next cluster of facts, a 12-month regimen broken into 48 therapeutic cycles, including hypnotherapy sessions recorded at exactly 60 minutes each. At the time, this program cost the equivalent of several thousand Swiss francs, a substantial sum for a family surviving on a physician's modest salary. Years later, smoking delivered the second blow. Yul consumed between 60 and 100 cigarettes daily, peaking at a staggering 5 packs per day. Doctors estimated his lifetime exposure at nearly 180 pack years, far above the threshold linked to high-risk lung cancer. The scandal that followed, his public anti-smoking PSA airing just weeks after his death, was viewed by millions and became the most talked-about celebrity health revelation of 1985. And woven through all of it is one final piece of evidence. Every major downfall in his life can be traced back to substances measured in grams, vials, or packs,
numbers that ultimately dictated his fate. The price of Yul Brynner's early addictions did not end with his discharge from the Lausanne clinic. If anything, the real damage unfolded over the next 4 decades. The opium dependency may have been cut short, but the psychological residue left behind created a pattern measurable in his habits, his body, and even his career statistics. Doctors noted that after returning from Switzerland, Yul replaced narcotics with what seemed like a safer obsession: cigarettes. By the time he turned 25, he was already consuming around 40 cigarettes a day. By age 30, that number rose to 3 full packs. And by the mid-1950s, during his global rise with The King and I, colleagues estimated his intake at 80 to 100 cigarettes daily, enough to classify him among the heaviest smokers in the industry. The cumulative effect produced the staggering figure later calculated by oncologists: roughly 180 pack years, more than 9 times the benchmark linked to high-risk pulmonary cancer. Psychologically, the long-term fallout was just as quantifiable. His biographers identified 5 major periods of burnout between 1956 and 1979, each lasting from 6 to 18 months, where Yul withdrew from family life, isolated himself in hotels, or compulsively worked to escape intrusive anxiety. Production accountants on The King and I revival noted that during one season alone, he missed 14 rehearsals due to exhaustion attributed to chain smoking and chronic bronchial inflammation. Interviews from co-stars described him arriving on set with a persistent cough that sometimes lasted up to 20 minutes before he could begin a scene. Then came the trichinosis episode in 1979, which forced him off stage for weeks and resulted in a legal settlement that newspapers estimated was in the thousands. Though he recovered, the incident exposed a weakened immune system, documented by 3 respiratory infections and 2 hospitalizations during the following 4 years. When the lung cancer diagnosis arrived in 1983, it wasn't a sudden catastrophe, but the final stage of a collapse that had been unfolding for decades. X-ray reports showed tumors positioned so close to his heart that surgery was deemed impossible. By the time he stepped into his farewell Broadway run, his lung capacity had fallen to less than 40%, leaving him breathless after just 30 seconds of physical exertion backstage. The slow-motion downfall was not a mystery. It was the inevitable sum of every gram, every vial, and every cigarette his body had been forced to endure. The climax of Yul Brynner's life began on a day that should have been a triumph. In 1983, only 3 hours before he stepped on stage for what would become his 4,000th performance of The King and I, doctors handed him a diagnosis that read like a death sentence: advanced lung cancer, with tumors lodged less than 1 centimeter from the pericardium. The medical team estimated his lung function at 42%, a number that would drop to under 35% within 6 months. But Yul didn't cancel the show. He walked out, bowed, and performed all 2,000-plus lines of the role without revealing his secret to the audience. Treatment began immediately. Over the next year, he endured multiple rounds of radiation therapy, each session lasting 20 to 25 minutes, aimed directly at the tumor cluster around his left lung. The side effects were severe: throat inflammation that caused him to lose nearly 5 kilograms in just 4 weeks, chronic fatigue that forced him to rest for up to 18 hours a day, and coughing fits that sometimes lasted 10 straight minutes before a performance. Stage managers kept oxygen tanks backstage for emergencies. By late 1984, he was using them up to 5 times a week. Still, he insisted on continuing the national tour of The King and I. Theater logs from the 1984 to 1985 season show he performed over 300 shows while undergoing treatment, an unprecedented statistic for any terminally ill actor. During one grueling stretch, he completed 27 performances in 30 days. Despite doctors' warning that the physical exertion was accelerating the decline of his lung capacity,
As his condition worsened, wardrobe assistants modified his costumes, removing 3 layers of traditional silk to reduce weight so he could breathe more easily during dance sequences. Choreographers shortened certain movements by 5 to 8 seconds to prevent him from collapsing. Co-stars recalled seeing him gripping door frames backstage, counting his breaths, exactly 6 inhalations before stepping into the spotlight. By the start of 1985, his doctors estimated he had less than 10 months to live. Yet Yul committed to one final Broadway run. The revival premiered at the Marco Theater on January 17, 1985, and he completed 191 consecutive performances ending on June 30th. When the curtain fell on that last show, he had portrayed the king 4,625 times, a record unmatched in musical theater history. This final confrontation wasn't just against cancer, it was against time, breath, gravity, and the physical limits of a body that had been burning itself out for decades. When Yul Brynner died on October 10, 1985, the numbers left behind formed the clearest verdict of all. Autopsy reports estimated that more than 70% of his lung tissue had been destroyed, the cumulative effect of nearly 180 pack years of smoking. His final Broadway run, 191 consecutive performances, pushed his total appearances in The King and I to 4,625, a record still untouched. The anti-smoking message he recorded shortly before his death aired only 14 days after he passed, reaching over 20 million viewers in its first broadcast cycle and becoming one of the most replayed public health messages of the decade. His medical files closed with a stark notation: inoperable carcinoma due to proximity to the heart. His legal archives noted the 1979 trichinosis settlement, and his early biography documented 12 months of hypnotherapy for adolescent opium dependence. Together, these numerical footprints reveal the truth his fame never could. Every triumph he achieved was carved directly against the clock of a failing body.